Hello, this keyshot demo will cover textures and labels and some lighting. So textures are as described. It's a way to add texture to an object. So here we have a cube. There's three different options for texture maps. The first one is color. So if I'm editing this cube's material currently. So if I check this box, I can load an image I found on Google, so this mesh, and it simply applies the image to the object, wrapping it like a Christmas present. So thinking of color like wrapping paper. Um, it is worth noting that the mapping type, the way that the image is mapped onto the object or applied to the object, has different options. So there's a default here. I believe it often defaults to box. Here it's no surprise because it is actually a box. But depending on the shape of your object, you may want to choose different options here. So for example, there is cylinder. If you click on move texture, you can see how it's being applied. So the reason it's getting this like crazy star pattern up here is it's basically taking all of these edges of the mesh and just stretching them inwards because the image is only being applied from a cylindrical aspect around the object. Other options, common options, I believe, are planar. This is just simply applying the image from as a 2D perspective or from a 2D plane. So again, this is also why we're getting these streaks on the side. But for the most part, I believe Keyshot makes sort of an intelligent guess as to what you're trying to do. But just be aware you can make those changes as needed for your wrapping of your present. The next option is bump. This is what gives sort of a three-dimensionality to the wrapping paper. So if it's not clear now, but if I uncheck this box and zoom in, you can kind of see that it has these little indents in the material. If I uncheck it, you can see the difference. So this is how you add three-dimensionality to it. If we click on this image, we have some options down here. One of them is all the way down here under bump. It's the bump height. So this is how strong the 3D impact is. And so you can try playing with these values. It does have a limit to how far it goes or works. And it looks here to me that I have my bump wrong. It looks like it's pushing it in, not out, which is not necessarily how the mesh would work. I will cover, after I show you this, how I created this custom texture in Photoshop. So yeah, so we have our wrapping paper, we have our three-dimensional effect to the surfacing, and the final one is opacity. So this is like whether it's transparent or not. So the thing to remember with opacity is that white means opaque and black means transparent. So now when we apply it to the mesh, it kind of knocks out what is in between these wires and gives it this kind of illusion that the box is see-through. One thing worth mentioning is this setting here for sync. This means that all of the three textures are synced together. So if we change the size, so let's say you want your mesh to look smaller, it really doesn't matter which one we're in. You can change this to 0.5, and here now it's half the size, and it makes that chain link smaller. Now, let's talk about how I created these custom textures. You might see some seams in here. These are like, it's kind of hard to see. I think Keyshot does a pretty good job of hiding them. But if you look really carefully, you should be able to see sort of like a grid system on here, a tile. And that's because this mesh texture that I just pulled from Google, it doesn't align to itself well. When the texture is smaller and the object is larger, it has to create a tile system like in your bathroom or kitchen of using that same image over and over again. And where the edge of the image meets another edge of the same image, it creates a line. Now there are some ways to fix that in Photoshop. So unfortunately, I have to excuse my older version of Photoshop. But since we're on the topic of seams, so what I'm talking about is, I guess if I change this canvas size and just double it roughly, the edge is created when it tiles up like this. And you can see like it might hide it kind of okay, but because the mesh is going at a slight angle, it doesn't meet up perfectly. Now this is actually a really hard one to fix, but I can talk about how you would go about doing that. So there's an option under filters in Photoshop and other, and offset. First you want to know the overall pixels of your image. So first I'm going to check that, and we're going to go to image, image size, and this is what we're looking for. So here it's 1200 by, let's call this 1200. And what you want to do is use this offset command to set it to be half the pixels. So that's why we need to know it. So in this case, 600 is half of 1200. And here what this is doing is it's taking one corner and shifting it. So it's like taking this corner and shifting it to the side. So all these interior edges now become the exterior edges of the box. And that's important because we know that all the interior edges align with each other. So when we do this offset, we know that if this tiles, it will align. So if I go to image, canvas size, and change this yet again, oops, I didn't do this properly this time. We know that when it tiles, the edge will align. Right, so there we have the edge aligning, and that's because we did that offset. But now we can see what the seam looks like in the middle, and this is what we have to Photoshop and fix. And like I said, some files are easier to fix than others. This one is a particularly challenging one, specifically because of this here. This would take some like time to go in and manually like erase all of this. Other options, like this cork, work a bit better because it's kind of it's more busy. It's less of a grid pattern than the mesh. So here I did the offset again, and here if I zoom in, you can see, hopefully you can see this seam. But again, when you zoom out, it's kind of hard to see. The quickest way to fix something like this is I use this patch tool. If you don't see it, it's under the spot healing brush. But the patch tool is just a quick way to like select, I'm just clicking and dragging, selecting this inner seam and just dragging off to the left, and Photoshop will like content aware fix it and blend it. I don't know, maybe I created a new seam here. But if I zoom in, you should be able to see, yeah, there's a weird X here. I don't know what's causing that. But the left to right seam is gone. Here, if we undo the patch tool here, you can see this seam. After the patch tool, that seam is blurred a little bit. So that's kind of like the quick fix. Obviously, this would take a bit more time to make this tile properly. Now, in order to create the 3D bump map, the option is also under Filter. So you go to Filter, 3D, and Generate Normal Map. It's kind of confusing. There's a Generate Bump Map. Generate Normal Map I have found works. It creates something that looks like this in Photoshop. So this is based on the cork here. So it takes this, it reads all the dark spots, it applies this kind of purple color to it. When I created the mesh bump, I just desaturated it, and clearly I think I had it facing the wrong way. There's a setting, I think, to flip up and down. And again, I apologize, I don't have it in my Photoshop. It's just an older version, but it's under Filter. It would be above Blur for 3D. And that's how that was created. The opacity mask that I have here, this was just created by playing with curves. So there's different ways to play with like contrast in Photoshop. But here, this is the original file. You can see there's this medium gray in here. So I went to Image, Adjustments, and Curves. If you're not familiar with curves, it's just a way to play with specific gradients, I guess. So here, this is saying like this is a lot of gray here. This is black, this is white. So for example, if I drag this up, all of the black will get lighter. So if I want to take this level of gray and darken it, what I can do is and just kind of select out a single range. Just drag this down and drag this up. And so basically I took all of this medium gray, which I'm assuming was this peak here, and making it black. And I mean, again, you can like tweak to your heart's content in terms of how fussy or accurate your rendering needs to be. But that's roughly how I created this opacity mask from this original file. So yeah, I mean, but Keyshot has plenty of nice stock textures. I just wanted to show you how to create things from a Google image if needed. Okay, so that covers textures. Let's look at labels now. So I'm going to hide this cube. The way that I made the cube is I went to Edit, Add Geometry, and Cube. So if you need to practice for this demo, that is how you would create it. For the labels, so I'm going to just double click on this. For the labels, we'll go over to the Labels tab. What I find that helps, again, think of this like a sticker. What I find helps is looking at the face where you want to apply the sticker basically orthographically. So I might like go over to the camera and just say like front view, for example, or top view, depending on where it is that I want to place the sticker. Now, once I'm there, I will go back to, I can double click on this to load the material again and go to labels. And here I simply just click on the plus button and say add label. And here, now, ideally these are PNG files, so they have transparency. You can download PNGs, but I recommend opening it in Photoshop and saving it back out, because sometimes a downloaded PNG with a transparency won't translate well. It'll still have a white background or something. So yeah, you just simply click in place. You know, you can change the size. I believe the higher the DPI, the smaller it gets, which always seems backwards to me. Other settings, sometimes, you know, if you're applying this to like a window or something, let's see, let me drop another label on the front here. And let me follow my own advice and take a front view of this. And now I will double click, go to labels. And again, this is what you would use for like logos, graphics for buttons like power. So yeah, you'll notice here we have the sticker on the front and it translates to the back. This is a common question, is how to prevent that. And it's simply, I believe it's this setting. So click on two-sided so that it turns gray and it's not blue, and there it's no longer on the back. If we turn this back on, it kind of projects the sticker all the way through the object. I don't know why this is on by default. You can change the angle. So yeah, there's a bunch of settings here to play with. So another question I've received is like, how do you change the material of this? So, I mean, here you have some control, I believe, on the brightness. If the material options are quite limited, here you can play with like how shiny it is, reflective. Now I know here's what I was looking for. The label type, so you do have some material options here in the label type at the top here. So it defaults to plastic. Again, I find that this is somewhat limited in its ability. So like here, metallic, depending on your lighting, you might get more of a reflection here. Other things worth mentioning about this label is it also has the mapping type. I believe this one is the one that defaults to planar. So again, here you can kind of like play with the application of it. You can change it to, you know, some of these other options. So here in this case, again, if you're like mapping onto a bottle or something. But I find that Keyshot often, the default is planar, and that tends to work best for what you're doing. So that's labels. Again, think of it like a sticker. It's useful. This is how you're going to put on like your object property, you know, certification made in barcode, so on and so forth, and any like logos that your object might have. All right, for lighting, I think I'd like to look at an actual object. So I'm going to go to File, New. I'll get away from this and I'll import the Blender that I built. I found that since we're now in Keyshot 9, it does import SOLIDWORKS 2020 files without an issue. But if you still have challenges, the step saving it out as a step file should give you a good backup option. Here are just my settings. These are all default, really. I haven't messed with any of these. So if you want to see what those are, I'm just going to click import. All right, so here's my Blender with the Lego gear that really doesn't make any sense for a kitchen. So I'm going to apply some materials to it. Plastic here for clear. Right, I can just drag this over to the carafe, or maybe I want it to be more of a rough type plastic on there for some texture. Again, this is sort of my preferred default options, plastic, hard, and rough. And we can drag over like a dark gray onto these objects. And now it's applying the color to all of the same similar colored bodies from SOLIDWORKS. You can unlink materials by right-clicking on objects and saying unlink. This is a bit of a recap from the first keyshot demo. So again, unlink material. We can get some sort of like darker grip in here. It's asking me, it's saying, hey, we noticed the cord and this are the same material. Do you want to link them? I just said no. I'm just going to go through here and unlink a couple of these. And you just get sort of all these touch points. So these ones I'm fine linking because maybe the inside of the handle and the buttons and the Lego gear, I don't mind them all being the same. But yeah, so looking at lighting, we have a couple options. So I planned ahead in SOLIDWORKS. This wasn't in the SOLIDWORKS demo, but I built in some rings here around these buttons. So I can click on this, and I can say unlink material for these two rings. And I set this up as a bit of an experiment to see what different options we have. So right now this is the default gray, but they're unlinked. So if I double click on this ring, it's not selecting it for me. Come on. I'm going to go back to the scene here to see what I'm selecting. Okay, so I am on the ring. If I double click on this, there is an option to change the type of the material up here in the material graph. So there's two different ways to apply material. You can drag it from the library or you can tweak it in this material graph. So here I'm going to change this from plastic. There's two options for lighting here. There's area light. Well, there's multiple, but there's two that I have found that work best. One is an area light and one is emissive. And I want to talk about the difference between the two. So here I applied an area light to this one. So again, we're going for like a light up ring around the button. So I'm going to double click on this ring here. I'm going to change this one to emissive. And hopefully what you can see just through observation is, well, firstly, the area light is brighter. But the main difference is that the area light casts light onto objects around it. So look at this button here. It's being lit up by the ring. Whereas this is emissive, but the objects are not reflecting it. So if I double click on this ring and in fact change this color to something more recognizable, even like a soft red, like a pink here, a pastel red, you can see that it's reflecting red on the gear and the buttons. Whereas this emissive, if I change this to like a green, it will glow as green, but it does not reflect green on the objects around it. So what that tells me is that chances are you probably want this area light if you're going for kind of like a glow. But you can use that knowledge to play with whatever kind of result you want. Double clicking back on the area light, I believe it defaults to 1000 lumen. You can play with this number to make it less intense if you want. I am also noticing, let's make this a pure red. Okay, yeah, so it looks like the emissive, let's see what that does. It looks like the emissive is better at picking up the saturation subtly than the area light is. Now, one possibility is to do a combination of both. With the area light, if I double click on this, I believe there's an option here, visible to camera. So I can always uncheck this, and it will give away that glow without having that body. So, you know, there are opportunities to combine the two options. So if I double click on this ring, right here I can say, I can say duplicate. So again, here, this is the red area light ring. I can tell it to duplicate itself. I can move it like away a little bit, right? So now we see the glow is, the way I built this is kind of in a pocket within SolidWorks. If I shift this away, the glow spreads. And what I can do is, it would be helpful at this point, I think, to rename these things. So I believe 2 slow clicks renames it, or is it properties? It's properties. So here I can say area ring, and here I can say, I think, like color ring. Oops, nope, this is the wrong one. You want to make sure you grab this the same. So nope, this is something else. This one here is the color ring. And what I mean by area ring and color ring is, here, if we turn this off and just double click on this glowing red light, I can uncheck the visibility to the camera so that we actually don't see it. It's just casting the glow, but the body is not there. And then with the, what I'm calling the color ring, we can double click this one and set it to be emissive. And this way we can tweak the exact color we want. So it's using a combination of the two to kind of dial in what you want. Now the hard thing is, because the glowing one is not visible to the camera, I believe you have to select it from here and just say material, edit material. And so here again, you can dial in the amount of glow. Yeah, if you have a lamp, let's pretend that this is some kind of lamp. You can say edit, add geometry, and add, for example, like a sphere. And this can become your light bulb. So I can place it by dragging on these. I can try and get it to be in the middle of my object here. And now if I edit the material, same thing, I can change this to be like an area light and have it glow, and then again change it so it's not visible to camera. Now that said, because it's a glowing ball, you can see it is still visible in its own way. So hopefully you have a lampshade to hide it, but if you have a lampshade, this is how I would create a light from the source, is basically importing a new body and turning it into an area light. Now, of course, reminder, to go back and review keyshot 1 if you need to. You can also set up custom lighting through the environment tab here. As just a brief overview, going to environments here and just starting with something completely black. You can go to the HDRI editor and use the add pin light command and click on parts of the object where you want the light to be. And this is very useful for copying your image, your replica, to set up the same lighting for what you want. Now, last but not least, in the same way that we set up a background image in SolidWorks to review our work, that can also be done in Keyshot, the same trick. So I believe it is still under environment, but you have to go to settings. You want to go to background, and here it defaults to lighting environment. I typically use color, but in this case you can select backplate image, and you can pick whatever your render image is as the background. And this way, again, this can help you align the camera view to where you want it. A way to double check your work. You can see this back here. Just before you hit render, you want to click on color instead of backplate image, obviously, to get this set up. And of course, once you have it aligned how you want it, go to camera, create a new camera view, and save it. And that way you can always flip back and forth. So I think that covers everything. Yeah, hope that helps.